Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Kerbal Space Program video, 1% science mode. We had to crank it down to 1% because 10% science, we were making so much science that if we didn't crank it down to 1%, we'd win the game way too fast. So in last week's stream, Monday, we sent a crew of engineers to go up to the Jolly Roger, or what's left of it, and put parachutes on the fuel section of the craft so that we could finally bring that back down the Kerbin. We could have used the new SSTO, but for old time's sake, we used the old Orion. This would be the last time we would use the Orion SSTO. After this, it would be retired. We would send out the engineers to go ahead and put the docking port from the Jolly Roger onto the SSTO so that we could dock with the Jolly Roger and then transfer the parachutes over to the Jolly Roger. We would then attempt to bring the whole thing down in one piece. However, it didn't quite work out the way we wanted it to, but we were still able to deliver most of it. The Jolly Roger was a good ship. It was designed for one mission and one mission only, and that was to go to Duna, collect all the science from Duna, and come back. It did just that. There were plans on landing on Duna's moon, but we just didn't have enough fuel. The Jolly Roger would have 2 shuttles to land on Duna's surface and collect science and then come back up. So the Jolly Roger operated as not only a transport craft, interplanetary transport craft, but also an orbital refueling station for the shuttles. When the Jolly Roger came back, there really was no future for it. It did its mission, and it was a good ship, but what ultimately did it under was the fact that when we came back from Duna, we had so much science that we unlocked a butt ton of technology, which made the Jolly Roger not only obsolete, but technologically wise, it sent it back to the freaking Dark Ages, which was one of my gripes in the entire series of the 10%. 10% is not low enough when you get to a certain point in the game. Ultimately, what we should have done was we should have gone to 1% as soon as we went to Duna. As soon as we became interplanetary, we should have just cranked it all the way down to 1%. I didn't know how to do that at the time. I found that out after we came back from Duna, but if I had the knowledge, I would have probably did that because the technology that was unlocked from coming back from Duna was so huge that we literally went from like a prop fighter plane into a F-22 fighter jet. We skipped a couple of decades, which really sucked. On Wednesday's stream, we skipped Tuesday, but that's another story. Wednesday, we worked on the payload that the new Jolly Roger would send to Eve once the new Jolly Roger would be built. Eve is our next destination, and it's kind of a tough one. There'll be no landing on Eve and doing a bunch of science and then coming back up and docking like it was on Duna. Eve's gravity is twice that of Kerbin, and its atmosphere is severely thick. It's not impossible to build an SSTO or some sort of shuttle, but it would have to be really big, and I'm not going to build something that big to go to Eve. So the next best thing is to actually land on Eve, but with a probe. So I went to work on building a rover for Eve. Not only will we build a ground-based rover, but also something that might be able to fly, or perhaps even one that can swim. The idea is also that we can bring 3 of these rovers and have each one be able to do one thing. One can fly, one can swim, and one can drive. Even though we had leaps and bounds of technology unlocked, we're still limited when it comes to rover tech, aka wheels. So we have to build our own. Luckily, we unlocked the robotic motors. The small ones, but still motors. Now the motors themselves are kind of crap. Sure, they work, and sure, we could sit down all day long and figure them out, how to make them move left and right and all this other good stuff. But there's something that's even better, that's way faster and easier. And that is to use the small motors as just simple rotors. Slap a reaction wheel on it, and you can easily control it with the WASD keys, no problem, nothing programmed or added or anything. It just works. Since the reaction wheel method was working really well, and all we needed was like a rotor system, I looked at the turboprop system, or turboshaft engine. The turboshaft engine can actually generate electricity if something on the other end of that rotor is spinning it. So say for instance you start moving downhill, if you were to make turboshaft engine a wheel, the very action of it going downhill would generate electricity, kind of like an electric car. I would demonstrate this for the chat by building a type of little testing rig. It'd have a small little motor on one end and the turboshaft engine on the other side. We also ran into the Kraken a little bit. There was some sort of glitch that gave us infinite energy. I think if either the turboshaft engine or the little motor, if you put the ARP revolutions per whatever all the way down to 0, it would somehow create infinite electricity for some stupid reason. So now that we knew that the turboshaft engine could generate electricity, we tried to make it into our wheels for the test rover. Unfortunately, the turboshaft engine is huge, and making it into just a rotor system started becoming more and more unlikely because of its cumbersome size. We would inevitably dump skip it and just go for a solar panel system in order to generate electricity. And we revert back to the small motorized motor. We would give the rover a paint job because Eve is supposed to be like Venus, real thick atmosphere, which would hold in a lot of heat. So technically speaking, it's really hot on Eve, possibly. So the rover would have to look like something that could survive inside of an oven. So I gave it a very steel kind of paint job, high temperature kind of paint job. We would try giving it a kind of a prop engine in the back so that it could possibly maneuver inside of water, kind of an all-terrain vehicle, but ultimately we figured that that wasn't going to work. Now it was time to give this thing a delivery system. So rover in the box it was. We would end up working on this type of design in the next stream as well. In the next stream, we would just focus on building the delivery system for the Eve rover. The biggest problem that we were having is that we have not unlocked any kind of metallic panel or anything of that nature yet. So if we're going to build a box, it has to be made out of wings, and of course wings create lift and drag. And the problem that we were having is that the rover was heavy enough, or should I say the box was lifty enough, to the point where the center of mass and the center of lift were actually upside down, so the box continuously wanted to flip upside down. We would need to build some sort of deployable drag system that would allow the box to fall the right way through the atmosphere and land. During this entire time, we were simply testing, so chat would give me their blessing when it came to something like a simulation. The entire couple of streams were nothing but simulations. In simulations, we can go ahead and we can revert flight, and we can go and make the gravity heavier or whatever the case may be in order to simulate Eve. The difference is that when we actually do missions, we cannot revert the flight. Mission is a mission, there's no simulation. The whole thing with the Duna spacecraft returning back to Kerbal was a special case, but we're not going to talk about that. Moving on. So we would try many different types of designs in order to get the center of lift on this box to go behind the center of mass in order for it to become stable during re-entry and during landing. And I will admit that it took a while. I was trying my best to keep the part count down, but ultimately, you just have to suck it up. Well, after we figured out the whole box problem for the transportation of the Eve rover, we decided to go through our entire craft loading files and clean it up a little bit. It had been a while since I've gone through it and cleaned it up. There was plenty of crafts that were way outdated now because of the simple fact that we brought home 1700 units of science, which unlocked a crap ton of technology, unfortunately. So throughout the entire stream, we were pretty much figuring out which crafts were completely outdated, which ones needed to be retired or completely deleted. I would also mess around with a tiny little SSTO, the smallest SSTO that we've been able to build in this playthrough, using the newly unlocked technology. Now, of course, it can't do anything special except get one Kerbal into orbit, but it's possible it could be given a small little service bay, cargo bay, maybe deliver something small into orbit, who knows. As I went through the entire craft files and started deleting things, I could hear the collective gasps and screams of my audience. I told them not to worry, many of these craft files were still good, they were just logged away as retired. This particular type of KSP series has actually gotten very far. We've been able to achieve things that I didn't think were possible at this level of tech. I am still quite upset at the fact that we didn't change from 10% to 1% before coming back from Duna, so that will always be a thorn in my side when I continue playing this game, knowing that I have a whole bunch of unlocked technology that pretty much makes everything that's inside of the craft files obsolete into the Stone Age drastically, which kind of sucks. And to think that if we had actually used the science mobile labs, we would have come home with like 2,000 or 3,000 science, that would have sucked. That would have super sucked. But that's okay. We're at 1% now, so something like that's not going to happen again. Everything that we rebuild and upgrade and update will stay that way, and any technologies that we unlock, it'll be a simple refit instead of complete massive redesign. But that's where we're at right now. The goal is to finish creating things for the Jolly Roger NCC 1000A, and then finish, of course, building the Jolly Roger itself, and then sending it to Eve on a grand mission to Eve that will probably take a month to complete, just like the Duna mission was. At the end of the stream, we would lovingly say goodbye to the Orion Series spacecraft. The Orion Series spacecraft has come a long way. It was actually one of the very first spacecraft, SSTOs, that we had built in order to carry not only personnel but also cargo into low Kerbal orbit. It had gone through many versions, many iterations, many different designs, but ultimately between the Kestrel, the Ark Raven, and the now Hercules SSTOs, the Orion series, has finally phased out. Chat would lovingly give it a salute and a good send-off, as the entire SSTO Orion series spacecraft would go into retirement, alongside other very memorable spacecraft such as the Dudfield and the Luna. The Star Rook, the Moonshot, and even now, the Moonrunner is on the verge of retirement. But anyway, thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for being part of this channel. If you liked what you saw, please leave a like, and if you loved what you saw, consider subscribing. We also have a membership program. If you become a member, you get cool emojis and badges and stuff next to your name. Pretty cool. Check it out. Thank you again for watching. Love you all. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video or stream. Bye for now. Bye-bye.